guest speaker today is a native of Dallas, Texas. He's a photographer, inventor, and he's traveled worldwide producing adventure documentary films. He co-founded the White Buffalo Healing Arts Center in Phoenix, Arizona, and he spent the last year and a half living in southern India in a Tibetan monastery. And he's relatively new. I think this is his first experience with New England weather. He was quite impressed with the snowstorm back around Halloween. So please, will you welcome Mr. David Browning.
So I'd like to spend just maybe 1 minute, maybe two, explaining a little bit more about who I am. In 1997, I was flying back from Washington, D.C. to my home, and I went into a spontaneous meditative state. I had never studied Eastern philosophy. I didn't know what Buddhism or Hinduism was. I'd never done any formal meditation practices or anything. But I just went into this state of awareness and consciousness while I was on this flight. And when I got back home, I told my wife about it. And that night, around 10 o'clock in the evening, she let me know she was going up to go to bed. And I told her, okay, I'll be a few minutes. And I went and sat on the couch. And went into this space of nothingness. There was no sight, no sound, no visions, no voices, no experience at all. And when I opened my eyes, it was 4 o'clock in the morning. And I had not gone to sleep. I was not meditating. I was not having psychic experiences or multidimensional traveling. But I had been somewhere. I knew, because when I came out, the first thing I remembered was, there is no death. It was not a thought. It was an actual experience. I remember looking at the door and wishing someone would come through the door with a sword and just cut my head off, because I was so excited to see where I was going to go. I mean, I really knew it wasn't going to end at that. I went about my day normally, and the next evening, at about 10 o'clock, I went back to the couch, and it wasn't with any intent to go, oh, I want to do this again. That was really cool. I just went and sat down on the couch, and again, I dropped into this nothingness. And about 4 o'clock in the morning, I woke up again, came out. Again, I hadn't been asleep, I wasn't meditating. And this time, there was an awareness that everything was God, that everything was the source, that I, and everything I saw and perceived was that. I did this for 6 months. I owned 2 companies at the time, a documentary film company, and I owned a U.S. patent that was in a bunch of big retail stores. And I told my wife, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. And for 6 months, I stayed in this meditative state. I would come out, and after the first few times, I would go to my desk for about 2 hours, and I would journal about what would happen, the awareness that I had. And then I would spend the rest of the day just driving around the red lake in my convertible and just being in total bliss and grace. It was phenomenal. After 6 months, I decided I should find out if I had lost my mind and gone insane. So I started looking for books to see if anybody else had had this experience. I would go to Borders or Barnes & Noble or anywhere I could find and open up these books and see, well, has anybody done this? And a lot of the stuff at the beginning was very superficial. A lot of the books that I found were just, about things that were beneficial to people, but that weren't this deep, deep experience that I had. But then I started finding some. And most of the writings were very ancient. They were ancient Hindu text, ancient Buddhist text, the Bible, Sufi poetry. And so I decided if I had gone insane, at least I was in good company. I spent the 2 years just sort of becoming comfortable with the experience and what had happened. I didn't really read any books. I would just open them and look at things. I didn't want anything altering the experience. I wanted it to be pure. And I figured afterwards, then I'll go out and find out what was going on. After the 2 years, I reached basically a point where I felt like a process had completed and I was going through a transition. And I spent the next 15 years traveling the world, meeting different masters, mystics, saints, prophets, studying different practices, not to learn, but more just to see what they really were. Because you can read about them in books, but unless you go and do them, you don't know. I spent an extensive amount of time with a Hindu master named Sri Sri Ravi Shankar. Was going to become a teacher for him. As Don mentioned, I spent the last year and a half in a Tibetan monastery in South India, so I spent a lot of time with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and some very high monks there. After a year and a half of being in India, I decided it was time to come out of the cave, or somebody decided it was time to come out of the cave. And I'm currently writing 4 books. One of them is on quantum physics and spirituality, so I was going to MIT to do some research there, and somehow ended up here in Greenfield. So basically, that's what I'm doing. What I'd like to share with you today is a thing which I call the Mystic Seven. And while I'm discussing it, there's a word that I'm going to use a lot, and it's called Samadhi. Some of you may be familiar with that word. It's also Sanskrit and used in a lot of the Hindu text. I use my own definition for it, but I use the word because the experience I had, I couldn't find in any books. It wasn't meditation. It wasn't prayer. It wasn't all of these English words that we had. There was this nothingness. There was nothing there. But everything was there. When I came back, I knew I had seen and perceived and experienced everything. So when I finally found this word samadhi, it was as close as the experiences I could find. And so I'd like to read my definition of samadhi. So when I'm using it, you'll understand at least what I'm trying to say. Samadhi is the pure and absolute silence of the mind. It is the state of consciousness beyond all concepts and reality, where one abides in the awareness of supreme knowledge. And in its highest state, asamprajnata, there is actually no perceived experience at all, only the essence of the source. In this state of consciousness, an individual has tapped back into the universal consciousness, which they have actually never left. It is here that all knowledge, experience, and reality of the universe exists. This non-experience is very similar to the threshold between the waking and sleeping states of consciousness. A moment when there is a complete cessation of thought and perception. There is actually no experiencer, and therefore no experience. The only difference is, in the threshold between the waking and sleeping state, is that you bring nothing back. In the nothingness of the source, you bring everything back. One now holds within their own mind the origins and nature of the eternal and infinite. All knowledge, all experience, all existence. An unimaginable combination of phenomenon which is beyond the physical mind's capacity of comprehension. In one fraction of a second, in that one instant of non-existent time, you experience the entire known and unknown universe. You smell every fragrance, you see every vision, you hear every sound and feel every feeling and taste every flavor. You spontaneously cognize all knowledge of the universe and experience every life that has ever existed or that ever will. You see all dimensions of time and space and all that resides within them. However, unlike the physical realm, where after you have had the experience and after time it begins to fade from your memory, in the experience of nothingness, these experiences and this awareness never subside from the mind and the soul. They will be with you forever, and never again will you be able to see the world or anything else as you once did. So that's the best I can describe the experience. In those 15 years, I've been trying to find a way to express this experience. And one of the ways that it's happened is I've written a lot. It's not me that actually does the writing. It's not being channeled or any of that stuff. It's just God writing. And one of the things that has come is, as I mentioned, a thing called the Mystic Seven. So that's what I'd like to share a little bit with you today. As I'm talking, I'm hoping that two things will happen, and this poem best explains it. To eliminate the illusory veil of ignorance and witness the radiant truth of the source, there are two choices. The delicate words that are heard by the soul, not listened to by the mind, or you can choose the razor-sharp edge of the steel sword. I'm hoping to do both when I'm talking today. A lot of this will hopefully be very pleasant and beautiful and inspiring. And you'll already know it and say, well, I know that. Some of it's going to attack your ego, and it's going to be very uncomfortable probably, and you're not going to like it at all. So anyway, hopefully we'll be able to both of that way. So the Mystic Seven. The Mystic Seven is a list of direct experiences that one has while in the state of asamprajnata samadhi. They are also the fundamental characteristics or qualities of the source. And once anyone looks beyond them, they abide outside of the universal truth and dwell in the realm of conventional and illusory reality. When I first wrote the Mystic Seven down, and I'll tell you what they are, it's the source, eternity, infinity, unity, imagine that, nothingness, neither affirmation nor negation, and no essential nature. And when I first wrote these down, I sent them to my best friend in Texas, and I said, look, this is it. This is all the teachings that anybody ever needs. He goes, Dave, you need more than this. You know, people want to be able to read something. So I've decided to try and expand it and turn it into a book. But the truth is, the nature of the Mystic Seven is simplicity. It's that simple. There is a source. That's it. You already know this. Everybody in this room knows this. There's a source. You've experienced it. What else do we need to know about it? Okay? We are eternal. There is no death. That's it. The problem with the simplicity of these is that the mind wants something to be able to chew on, something to think about, something to analyze, something to experience. But the bottom line is, those seven things are it. And I found that if there's ever a question, these can answer it. The other thing about them is that they are non-exclusive. One of the things that I found when I've talked to people and shared this experience with people is that they want to apply eternity to one thing, but not to this thing. They want to apply unity to this thing, but not that thing. You know, they want to say Jesus is God, but Hitler is not. The first four, the source, eternity, infinity, and unity, are experiences that I've found to be associated with enlightenment. There's an amazing amount of bliss and grace and beauty and just overwhelming compassion that are associated with these experiences. The last three are actually something that are beyond enlightenment. And it took me a long, long time to find any reference to this at all. And the reason I think is because bliss is an easy sell. You know, if you tell somebody you can bring them out of suffering or out of bondage or out of pain or be healthy, this is great. People will buy this. But if you start telling people that there's no essential nature, or the essence of all reality is nothingness, they don't like that. And it's very difficult to even express or discuss with people unless they've had the experience. So there's not a lot written about it. We're probably not going to go into a lot about that today. But I wanted you to be aware that there is something that is beyond enlightenment. There is a force, nature or essence, that exists in everything. Some call it Brahma, Yahweh, Buddha, Allah, or God. Others refer to it as their higher power, the self or consciousness. But no matter what it is called or the name given to it, it is the same. It is the creative force that has manifested everything and experiences all reality through those manifestations. And as one explores deeper into their own expression and sees the ultimate nature of reality, they find that this source does not exist in everything, but that in fact everything exists within it. We are born into this physical reality with a veil placed before us that prevents us from realizing our origin. But through silence and going within, one can become re-aware of this source, the true nature of reality, and attain liberation from ignorance, bondage, and suffering. One of the things that I found is that the source itself is inexpressible. You can take all of the words in every language, every painting, every poem, every photograph, every personality, every action, every event that has ever occurred or ever will, and it will not even scratch the surface of what the source is. There's a lot written about this, and there's a lot of frustration about it too, because people, when they have this experience, they want to be able to share it with people, because it's so beautiful and so profound. And when they find that it's inexpressible, it becomes a very difficult process. The only thing I can really say about the source itself is that I know it exists. And so does everybody in this room, and so does everybody on this planet, and so does everybody in this whole reality. Somewhere inside us, we know there is this source. There's a commonality about it because people that write about it or try to express it have similar explanations of what it is. I know through my process personally that when I was doing my writing, after 6 months and started going out and reading these ancient texts from thousands of years ago, word for word, it was the same thing. And I instantaneously realized this is the source. It's saying the same thing it's been saying for billions and billions and billions of years. In exactly the same words. And fortunately, I'm able to abide in that all the time now. So I know it's real. And I know it exists. The next one, which is eternity, it's kind of difficult, again, when you try to start discussing this, is because there's no boundaries. You start talking about eternity, and all of a sudden you're in unity, and then you're in infinity, and then you're in the source of like. But eternity was my first experience. As I mentioned when I was sitting there and I realized there is no death. And so I put it first for a number of reasons, but none of that's really important. Eternity, I find really, really amazing, because I think one of the greatest illusions of any reality is that there is death. And I think it's phenomenal that a species of animals, us, that believes it has such a superior intellect, actually even has a word. Grieves over, and is afraid of something that doesn't even exist. It's phenomenal to me. I just, every day, I'm like, everybody knows it's not real. But we still have this difficulty with our mind of not knowing what our heart knows. I'm going to run long, so I'm going to have to jump to the next one, which is infinity. I don't have a lot to talk about infinity. It's more something that has to be experienced than something that can be discussed. When I first had the experience, I thought infinity and eternity were the same. I never looked them up in an encyclopedia or even thought about them. I've never thought about any of this stuff. But I found that they're extremely different. Eternity has to do with time. Infinity has to do with space. So basically, eternity means that we are eternal. We are immortal. There is no death. There was no birth. There is no ending. Everything has existed and will exist forever. Cool. I'm not going to die. Infinity means that there are an infinite number of realities, of dimensions, time and space. And this is a good explanation or a good reference or application to the non-exclusive parties. If you believe or accept the concept that God is infinite, then you have to say, well, okay, I'm infinite. What does that mean? That means there's not one David Browning. There's an infinite number of David Brownings. And there's not only an infinite number of David Brownings, but there's an infinite number of you, and you, and you. And there's an infinite number of you sitting in a room exactly like this. And there's an infinite number of variations of that. It's a pretty mind-blowing thing. But again, it's the truth. I've seen it. The thing we have to remember is that if I say God is infinite, but Lois is not, then I have said Lois is not God. And that's an impossibility. Because we are all God. The fourth one is unity. we are one. That's all I ever wanted to teach. We are one, we are one, we are one, we are one, we are one. That's all you need to say. It's all that ever needs to be said. We are one. It solves every problem, every conflict, every pain, every judgment. But it gets kind of boring after about 5 years of saying we are one. I've tried it. People really get mad at you. But if you can abide in that truth, that's all there is. We are God. I was talking to Don yesterday about the sword. He was asking me about the steel blade of the sword. And we got to talking about unity and non-separation. And we were discussing how if you can look at the most evil, the most cruel, the most unjust action, and you can see that as God, truly see it as God, then everything else is done. Everything else is easy. I'm just briefly going to go over the last three, and then I think we're going to listen to a little music. I abided in this experience of unity and I mean, everything I saw was God. Everywhere I looked, everyone I met, every action that occurred was God. But there was still something inside that made me know that there was something else beyond this bliss and this compassion and overwhelming, I would cry. I mean, I cry every day. I just start weeping just at the beauty of this reality and amazement. What we create. But I kept looking out and going, there's something still wrong. There's still something I don't understand. And I was driving over the Mississippi Bridge, and I turned to my wife and I told her about what I was thinking about. She said, don't you see, Dad? You still made God a concept. And at that very second, I dropped into that nothingness that I had been in for so many months before and realized that's it. As long as I perceived anything, it had an up. I mean, even the smallest quirk. And pretty soon they're going to find something smaller than quirks. There's still a top, a bottom, an inside, and outside. There's still something there. And if there's a top and a bottom, there's separation. So when I was in that nothingness where everything exists, there was no separation. There was no top, there was no bottom, there was no inside, there was no outside. And then I abided in that nothingness for quite a while. And I said, oh, this is the final awareness, nothingness. But then I kept looking around and going, but what about all this stuff that's around here? This is a nothingness. And that's where you get to neither affirmation nor negation. And this is where it breaks down to where there is no explanation, there is no description, it's only experiential. But there will come a time when you will understand and experience that you can abide in a state where nothingness and everything coexists and has coexisted since the beginning of time. And then the last one is no essential nature. And that is very simple. And that is when you realize that everything is God. We have a tendency of really easily saying, oh, well, love is God, but hate isn't God. Hate's Satan, hate's the devil. But the truth is, everything is God. So love is God, hate is God, joy is God, sorrow, misery, pain, compassion, bliss, war, peace, every single thing is God. And if everything is God, then God has no essential nature. Everything is its essential nature. Its essential nature is love. Its essential nature is hate. Its essential nature is. And if everything is its essential nature, then it has no essential nature. And it's another difficult sell, because everybody wants to put one certain thing on the divine. But trust me, everything is God. I think you're right. So that's the Mystic Seven. And I think that is my talk. I would like to conclude by reading one short thing. There is nothing more, this is nothing more than a veil hiding the final awareness. For in the direct experience of truth, there is no world and no dream. And of course, there is no experience or experiencer. Only thought within the mind of God.